Yeah, I think we got it a while now, according to Mia. This meeting of Parliament is hereby reopened. Just in case my introductions were missed, I just want to make mention of the fact that here this morning we have some special guests in the Legislative Hall of Parliament, and those are students of Group 8 of the Marie Genevieve de Weaver School, along with their teachers who we hereby welcome to Parliament. Thank you for choosing Parliament as a place to make a visit. And we also have the Minister of Romy here with us who will be making a presentation. And I stopped just before the adjournment at the part of indicating the notices that we have received from members of Parliament. We have received notice of absence from the members Roseburg, Weaver, Peterson, and De Weaver. I now look to the floor, to the members of Parliament here present, and ask if there are any notifications. This has been indicated by MP York, to whom I give the floor now. MP York, you have the floor for notifications. It's a CC, you may remain seated.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning to you. Good morning to the Minister's support staff. A special good morning to the students here from Mary Genevieve de Weaver Primary School, and good morning to the viewing public. Madam Chair, I took note of the recent events, namely the groundbreaking of the new prison held recently. And in the beginning, I was very jovial like everyone else because I thought, okay, yes, finally another step further in the direction that we all want to get to. And upon further looking at the rest of the pictures and stuff and making a couple calls, I came to an astonishing discovery, which led me to just one word: distasteful. Madam Chair, it doesn't matter if you like her or you don't like her. It doesn't matter if you voted for her or didn't vote for her. It doesn't matter if you like the party which she hails from or not. But no one, Madam Chair, that sat at that ceremony would have been able to sit there. No one, Madam Chair, who held a shovel would have been able to hold a shovel if former Minister Anna Elaine Richardson didn't do the work she did. And to find out that she was not even invited. Furthermore, any other former ministers of justice were invited to the ceremony, Madam Chair, is distasteful and disrespectful. We cannot one day be speaking about giving Jack the jacket, but when Jacqueline needs to get it, Jacqueline has to kick rocks. That is disrespectful. It's not about shine, it's about respect. And Madam Chair, to end on a lighter note, I also realized there were a lot of nice pictures taken with members of Parliament and ministers, etc., holding shovels. I also realized that you were again front line. Congratulations. But Madam Chair, I hope that this groundbreaking does not resemble that of the marketplace of 2 years ago. And that 2 years from now, we are not asking why millions have been spent and only grass has been cut. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, MP York for your notification. I now continue and I give the floor to MP Duran for notifications. MP Duran, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair Lady. Good morning to you, my colleagues, the Honorable Minister, his support staff, and a special good morning to my former school students from the M. Genevieve de Weaver School. I see Teacher Richardson there, who's my third grade teacher. I wasn't a teacher, but you know what I mean. It's my former school. It always gives me great pleasure to see, the next generation in the come up, because sitting among us, we have future ministers, future members of parliament, even maybe a future governor. So therefore, Madam Chair, I just want to send words of encouragement to those that are here and those that are not here. The sky is the limit. You can see yourself here. You have to just continue to strive for whatever you want to accomplish. And going over to my notification, Madam Chair, my colleague touched on the whole event with the groundbreaking for the prison. I sat in the seat. I know that the prison is very much needed, an up-to-date facility to house the inmates. I remember in 2020 at the Santa Barbara Hotel during the Justice delegation meeting that I had as the Minister of Justice, we had some strong discussions in terms of getting financing for it and reaching to a conclusion back then, because one of the issues was that you couldn't get money from the trust fund to do the prison. We then followed the process of a direct financing, and then UNOPS came on board. And as my colleague rightfully mentioned, the former minister, Anna Richardson, pushed and really make us reach to this milestone, and to not even get an invite. We as members of parliament weren't even invited. It just gives a bad taste in the mouth, and I hope that something is done in regards to this and it don't repeat itself. But what is even quite interesting, Madam Chair, is that we have the Marie Laurent School that was damaged back in 2017. I signed the building permit in 2023. The project so-called had to start. A contractor was paid 10%. We don't hear a peep from the Minister of Education as to the way forward. So we could groundbreak for a prison, but if we groundbreak for the schools, then we could prevent people from going to the prison. Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I will definitely be calling an urgent public meeting to find out where those funds went, because up to now, we can't hear any word from the Minister of Education how we're going to get back the money from the foreign company that didn't even come here, and we pay them 10% and we can't get back our money. Thank you very much. Because the Minister mentioned as well that it don't matter to me who do it once the job gets done. Thank you.
Thank you, MP Duran, for your notification. I continue with notifications as I invite MP Myers to take the floor or the mic. MP Myers.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, and a good morning to my colleagues in Parliament, to the Honourable Minister of Romy and his support staff, and to the future of St. Maarten, the students of the Genevieve de Weaver School. I was here sitting down. I asked one of the teachers if they're the 6th grade, because to me, they look kind of small. And I was trying to remember myself being that small. I graduated from the 6th grade some 44 years ago. So that's a long, long time. I'm saying that, and I would like to echo the sentiments of my colleague, MP Duran, to the youngsters. I believe in identification, and I believe that your presence here today and seeing persons that look like you achieve what we've achieved, it should instill something in you that you should be able to acquire whatever your dreams are. And there is nothing like identification in this world, because if you identify yourself with success, you yourself will become successful one day. So I wish you all the best. I wish you all the best in your upcoming exams for your next step, which will be MPC or St. Maarten Academy or wherever. But that's just the beginning of your journey. So reach for the stars, like MP Duran said. On the next note, Madam Chair, I would like to commend and I think I don't know if I missed it, but we have a way in St. Maarten that we can always highlight the negative. And when things are bad, we highlight it. But when things are good, we don't say anything about it. And as if it's supposed to be good, and no one gets a pat on the shoulder. Even when Jesus healed the lepers, and it was 10 lepers, only one came back to say thank you. He asked where are the other 9. So even Jesus himself wanted some gratitude for what he had done. In saying that, I would like to congratulate Anella and Brenda Brooks in the Christmas lights decoration throughout the island. It really brought back the Christmas spirit to St. Martin. It really gave St. Martin an uplifting look, and I think it's important that when people in our community, we want to build a nation, when people in our community do something that benefits the community, we as elected representatives should be able to say, job well done. So for that organization, I would like to say, job well done. And then lastly, Madam Chair, as it pertains to the situation that happened at the groundbreaking with the groundbreaking for the prison, I do not know, and I was not involved necessarily, no members of parliament was in the invitations, and that is something we can probably ask the Minister of Justice. Indeed, the members of parliament was not invited. That, I believe, is something that should have happened. But I know that in the ceremony, the minister acknowledged all former ministers, and the minister also declared that this was not an effort of her, that she was actually executing something that had been done as a whole and collectively what we've been able to achieve as St. Martin. I understand that some of the statements in regards to who have got the prison to where it is, but at the end of the day, I believe that the acknowledgement was made, and it's unfortunate. I believe that everyone who's contributed in one way or another to this development should be and was acknowledged yesterday at that ceremony. Those are my notifications for today. Madam Chair, I thank you.
Thank you, MP Myers, for your notification. The next MP to speak during notifications is MP Otley, to whom I give the floor at this time.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning to the students in the Tribune. Good morning to the viewing and listening public. Good morning to the Honorable Minister. Honorable Minister, it's nice to see you here. I look forward to see what you are bringing today. However, I notice a little notion that the Honorable Minister of Rummy comes when he wants to present and not when called. So it's often that when Brummy is requested, he can't make it. Nonetheless, Madam Chair, we all sit here and we all look at the future, the students that are sitting in this Tribune. I recently put an article called Break the Glass Ceiling. And this is what it's about. It's about them sitting in the Tribune. It's about our kids and grandkids to be. And we can all sit here and give them good speeches, but until we do what we need to do on this floor of Parliament, we cannot secure their future in this country. Madam Chair, I won't say the name, but I had a colleague that wasn't herself last week. And it's when I had a conversation, the colleague had to let me know her son from St. Martin, raised in St. Martin, cannot get a job in St. Martin. Got a scholarship in St. Martin and being victimized in St. Martin. That is why she was not herself. But today she's herself. Why? Unfortunately, her same son got a job out of the country, and a real good job. You know his sentiments? Mommy, I am not coming back. My country has forsaken me. So we lost another professional. When I speak, it's not about politics. It's about reality. And that was a glass ceiling that held this young man back. I pray that we, as members of Parliament, members in the government, can see what is happening. And it happened to some of us. If I did not turn to entrepreneurship, I would have been one. I have a master's degree, and I was one that could not get work. Again, maybe it's being raised differently that pushed me to say, instead of leaving, let me turn towards entrepreneurship. But even today, entrepreneurship is not attractive because we have a profit tax that takes 40% of what you make. So what are we creating for our country? What are we creating for the future? What are we creating for those to come? So I say to the students, yes, Madam Chair, everybody had 20 minutes.
No,
I would
that's
like
not
to
true.
get my point out. So I say
It's
to
not
the
20
students,
minutes.
I would say to the students, I hope that we can exemplify and show you, like my colleague MP Meyer said, what you can be. And a matter of fact, you can be way better than us. Thank you.
Thank you, MP Otley, for your notification. The next MP to speak is MP Lewis, to whom I give the floor at this time. MP Lewis for notifications.
Good morning, Madam Chair, to the Honorable Minister and your support staff. Good morning to my honorable colleagues. Good morning to St. Martin, and a special good morning to the students and teachers of the Mary Genevieve Primary School, a school that I also attended too. One of the first students that attended that school. The school was the smallest school then. Today, it is the biggest school, public school on the island. I sit here proud to say that Mary Genevieve the Weaver has done a great job with the current leaders here in St. Martin, sitting right here in Parliament. And that only means that you too can be the next one sitting here in Parliament or on the executive branch of government. Madam Chair, I would also like to extend my sympathies to the passing of Carlito Van Heinigen, who was more than a father, a friend, but also a pillar within our baseball community. His dedication and passion left a lasting impact on the baseball committee and the countless young athletes who have lived or lives have been influenced. I would also like to give my sincere condolences and sympathies to the family and fellow loved ones of Mary Bryson, who passed away yesterday. She is known for the lady that owns Meals on Wheels. My sympathies go out to her sister Veronica and her other nieces, nephews, and children. Madam Chair, I also would like to congratulate the Minister of Justice, Ms. Natalie Tackling, for the continuity of progress for the Point Blanche Prison and House of Detention. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, MP Lewis, for your notification. The next MP to speak during notifications is MP Irian. MP Irian, you have the floor.
Good morning, President Parliament, Secretary General, colleagues, the Honorable Minister of Vromi and his support staff, and to the students and teachers of the Mary Genevieve the Weaver School. You have at least 4 former students of the school here, or 5. Oh yes, 5. And so this is also your motivation and inspiration going forward. Madam Chair, I'd also like to give my condolences to the Maku family and for the passing of their loved one, Mr. Junior Maku. And I wish them much strength going forward. Madam Chair, it was mentioned briefly, and I'd like to say that I think it's worse than that. The Minister of Vromi, I guess with the support of the coalition, only attends the meetings that he thinks is important, through you, Madam Chair. We've had meetings called on infrastructure. We have meetings called on housing going back to April last year. We have numerous questions sent to the Minister of Vromi that are outstanding for over a year. And I would like the people of St. Maarten to know that I think that the chair with the presidium should also be held accountable for these things. As much as Parliament says we're not in control of ministers, at the end of the day, you are the regulators of Parliament, and you are part of the same coalition. So have an urgent coalition meeting, sit with your ministers and let them know that, hey, we can't operate properly because of the lack of response or the lack of attending to important meetings of Parliament. I've also taken notice, Madam President, that some members of the coalition, they get an uninterrupted length of speaking time notifications, and it seems as if the coalition gets very uncomfortable when other members speak and we are rushed or limited to our time. So if we're going to have specific time limits, then let it be known to members of Parliament that we could stay within that time limit for notifications, or let us know that if it's based off of an opinion of, hey, I don't want to hear this anymore. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, MP Irian, for your notification. The next MP to speak during notifications is MP Lacruz. MP Lacruz, you have the floor.
A blessed morning, Madam Chair, Lady Griffier, Minister, his supposed staff, those beautiful faces in the Tribune, the future of St. Martin, the teachers that are accompanying them, and my fellow colleagues here in Parliament. Madam Chair, Lady, I want to congratulate the Minister of Justice, this Minister of Justice, the previous Ministers of Justice, and everyone who had anything to do with the groundbreaking of the new facility in Point Blanche yesterday. But Madam Chair Lady, one word of advice. I was the last few days looking at a series on Netflix called Unlocked. And for those who have not seen it, I would encourage you to look at it, especially the Minister of Justice, because it boils back down to the point that I made during the meeting. I am all for a beautiful building, but if there's no rehabilitation, we have nothing. And to our kids that are here today, if you have Netflix, I would encourage you to look at that, because it is exactly what you do not want. I am more interested in, Madam Chair Lady, that our monies go into education, sports, programs, making sure that your lights at home are on instead of the street lights and Christmas lights. Those are the things I am interested in. So, Madam Chair Lady, please hope that everyone gets a chance to look at that series. It's short, but you will see exactly what I mean when I speak of rehabilitation and making sure that our kids never ever have to visit that facility at any time in their lives. Thank you, Madam Chair Lady.
Thank you, MP Lacruz. I had hoped that we could have gotten started on the agenda point before our students had to leave. However, given their time, I now need to adjourn to one. Allow the students to take a picture with the members of Parliament, and then they have to take leave of us in here as they then continue with their program for the day. So right now, I'm going to adjourn until 11 a.m., so for 5 minutes, and as we bid goodbye to the students. Meeting adjourned for 5 minutes until 11 a.m.
You see what I'm saying? You see what I'm saying? I like basically gave it, and then they're saying against the
Oh, they didn't come out yet. Okay, gotcha. Okay.
And the others.
Yeah.
Jacqueline got it, she doesn't get an invitation.
Members of Parliament, ladies and gentlemen, we have taken leave of the students of the Marie Genevieve de Weaver School who were here with us earlier as part of their visit to the Parliament of St. Martin. And we have, again, I want to welcome the Minister of Romy, Minister Patrice Gums, and his support staff to this meeting. However, before going over into the agenda point, I think it's important to touch on a matter raised by several members of Parliament during notifications, and very specifically, the reference by a member of Parliament that members of Parliament, and now I paraphrase, got their 20 minutes for notifications. There is no such time limit for notifications. There is not a speaking time for notifications. Notifications, while at the discretion of members of Parliament, are meant to be short and brief. And of course, if I see a member during notifications making it a sort of an agenda point and discussion, I will ask that member to keep it short. So I wanted to make that very clear. It's no 20 minutes for notifications, and it's at my discretion to ask a member to please take into account that notifications are exactly that. You make your notifications according to your discretion as to the topic of notifications, not the time of notifications. In addition to that, and I indicated during a recent meeting that I could understand the frustration of many members of Parliament regarding ministers responding timely to questions, as well as responding timely to invitations to appear in meetings of Parliament. I have also indicated to members of Parliament and the general public that the Parliament of St. Martin, via our Secretariat and the Secretariat of Government, are working on a protocol in terms of having an understanding about invitations, about presence of members of Parliament. However, I do want to note that going, at least in the future, something that I am seriously considering as part of my thrust to have this Parliament function more independently is to pay closer attention to the stipulation in the rules of order as far as it pertains to inviting ministers to meetings of Parliament. What do I mean with that? The Parliament must be able to function, have meetings, deliberate, and debate between itself. So we as members of Parliament, because if we go strictly according to the rules of order, inviting a minister to come and provide information in a meeting of Parliament would have to be approved by the Parliament. So one or more members would have to say they would like a minister to come into Parliament, and then Parliament would have to say, yes, let us bring in Minister so and so to give information about topic A, B, or C. So in the whole context of this protocol and understanding between the government and Parliament, these are the matters that we are looking at presently, and I will be apprising Parliament of as we continue to again streamline the workings and look for a more efficient and effective way of Parliament's functioning. So I thought it was necessary to put that out there as members continue to admonish the chair and presidium about meetings and the presence of ministers in meetings. So having made that clear for now, I continue with the agenda points for this meeting, and that is the Nature Policy Plan St. Martin 2025-2029. This document is registered under IS 365 of this parliamentary year, the parliamentary year 25-26, and it is dated November the 18th, 2025. As I mentioned, please take note that it is the Nature Policy Plan 2025-2030. Going over to the agenda point, I mentioned the IS number of this particular policy plan. I also mentioned when it was submitted to Parliament, namely the 18th of November of last year. And this submission of this policy plan has been done in accordance with Article 2 of the National Ordinance on the Foundations of Nature Management and Protection. This particular article in the Ordinance on the Foundations of Nature Management and Protection states, and I quote, "Once every 5 years, the minister establishes a national nature policy plan in which the international obligations entered into in this regard are also implemented. The nature policy plan requires the approval of Parliament, so that is specifically stated as such. And it indicates that the nature policy plan will in any case contain A, the objectives regarding nature and the landscape that must be achieved during the planning period, B, an overview of priorities in the field of nature and the landscape that need to be addressed within the planning period, C, the nature conservation values to be taken into account when implementing the policy, D, a list of national parks, both terrestrial and marine, which consist of natural parks established by national decree containing general measures." It continues, "When drawing up the nature policy plan, the minister takes the spatial development plans into account. The nature policy plan serves as a general framework for nature policy. Every year, before September the 1st, the minister reports to Parliament on the status of the implementation of the nature policy plan." All members of Parliament are in possession of a copy of this nature policy plan, and of course it can be found on the Parliament General team. So at this time, after this introduction, as I mentioned, we have here with us this morning the Honorable Minister of Public Housing, Spatial Planning, Environment and Infrastructure, the so-called VROMI Ministry, and we have Minister Patrice Gums of that ministry, and I invite the minister to now present his opening remarks and the presentation that he has prepared. This presentation, members of Parliament, so we have the nature policy plan, which will be commented and elucidated upon by the minister, and we have also received the presentation that the minister will now be providing on this policy plan. Minister Patrice Gums, I hereby give you the floor.
Thank you, Chair Lady. Good morning to the members of Parliament, those listening and viewing as well as online. Madam Chair, with your indulgence, I'd like to begin with just a quick, quickly addressing the remarks regarding my attendance to Parliament. And in the discussion, I did verify what actual meetings we have missed, if any at all, and the following was found to be the case. We have one meeting pending regarding the housing policy. A quick recap, the request for the housing policy meeting was made, I believe, in April last year, to which the response was the policy is not ready because it's being worked on still, and I requested, I believe a second request came in for an update, I believe in summer. It was not ready. We announced on December 10th that the policy was ready. There was a request then for a meeting that same week. I think what's very important to recognize is that policies being ready doesn't always equate that a presentation and the availability of the ministry is equated to that policy being finalized. So that's very important to recognize, that the image being given is that I'm not attending meetings, there's one pending meeting on one topic. Second to that, I definitely acknowledge that there are outstanding questions, and I'll say to MP York and to MP Duran, and then of course there's some from MP Westcott Williams, which we received in the beginning of January. So those, of course, are being worked on still. Our apologies for the two MPs with whom who we fall out of the time frame for those, but they'll be ready as well. But I just want to clarify that because sometimes we say things with the intention to create an image that really is not there. With that, Madam Chair, I want to go into the presentation directly and thank everybody again for the opportunity to be here this morning. And even though they've left, I think it's important to acknowledge that they were here, the Maria Genevieve de Weaver School. Important, why? Because the topic of nature and environment, why we're doing this as the Minister of Romy, is to ensure that we actually are able to take care and hand something, a healthier, cleaner St. Maarten to the future. So though they've left, really commendable that they were here today and that the Parliament had them invited for this particular meeting. So thank you for that. We're here today, of course, to discuss the updated nature policy plan for St. Maarten. And of course, we'll dive right into the presentation. Is it up? Not yet? Okay. We're just waiting for the technology to kick in. It's there? Okay. Wonderful. So on the screen, you'll see the presentation is up now. Thank you. I will briefly go over the background of the Nature Policy Plan and the different national and international requirements of this document. Then we'll briefly discuss the previous Nature Policy Plan for 2021 to 2025 before going into the updated Nature Policy Plan for 2025 to 2030, then lastly discussing next steps. Just a question, Madam Chair, for the comfort of the members of Parliament, are they able to follow the screen if it's behind them, or could we switch, because apparently the members of Parliament are unable to follow if it's behind them. So I'm just checking if the other screen, yeah.
Thank you, Minister. Let me adjourn for 2 minutes. Just let's get that matter
Thank you very much.
fixed if need fixing. Meeting adjourned for 2 minutes. Members of Parliament, ladies and gentlemen, we continue with the meeting, and the Minister of Romy, Patrice Gums, had just started with his presentation. Members, you have received the presentation in the event. It is difficult to follow it from the screen that it is on presently. So you also have the presentation itself. And Minister, you may continue.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just for the sake of everyone, I'll just start again what I first said. So we're here, of course, today to discuss the Nature Policy Plan 2025-2030. And of course, it's the updated Nature Policy Plan for Sint Maarten. To begin for the agenda of today, I will go over the background of the Nature Policy Plan and the different national, international requirements for this document. Then we will briefly discuss the previous Nature Policy Plan for 2021-2025 before going into the updated Nature Policy Plan 2025 to 2030, then lastly closing off with the next steps. So a brief background. The national requirement for a Nature Policy Plan comes from Article 2 of the National Ordinance on the Foundation of Nature Management and Protection, Landsverordening, Grondslagen, Natuurbeheer en Bescherming. This ordinance further puts forward the requirement for a nature plan in its Article 9. The Nature Policy Plan essentially serves as a general framework for nature policy and management for the coming 5 years. And the Nature Plan functions as the implementation plan containing an overview of the tangible actions to be realized in the planning period, as well as the term within which this will take place. So, of course, we have the Dutch original version of Article 2 of the National Ordinance on the Foundations of Nature Management and Protection. It clearly states that once every 5 years, the Minister of Romy will establish a national nature policy plan, which also implements the international obligations entered into in this regard. It also states the nature policy plan requires the approval, goedkeuring of the Staten, the Parliament. Firstly, it should be noted, though, that this approval is goedkeuring and not vaststelling establishment. From our understanding, this may be an error in the law that was incorrectly carried over post-10-10-10. In the time of the Netherlands Antilles, the legislation was quite strict and placed a lot of responsibility on the island councils, which is at that time functioned as a parliament, almost. It is understood that this was done at a time to prevent the local executive councils to take extreme or undesirable decisions and remain a bit more in control as the central government. With the dissolution of the Netherlands Antilles, each island has translated this requirement differently. We will soon start an assignment to review and update this national ordinance on the foundation of nature management and protection, and we will include a review and revision of the article in this process. Here is the original Dutch version of Article 9 of the National Ordinance on the Foundations of Nature Management and Protection. Now, we go very briefly over into international requirements. This national requirement for a nature policy plan originates from an international requirement originating from the International United Nations Convention on Biological Biodiversity, or CBD. The Kingdom of the Netherlands is a party to this convention since 1994, and Sint Maarten has been party to it since 1999 as the Netherlands Antilles. Parties to the CBD are called on to create National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plans, or NBSAPs. This is a national policy which aims at providing strategic direction at a national level on the management and protection of biodiversity. So our National Nature Policy Plan is our NBSAP. To help countries structure the NBSAPs, every decade, the CBD ratifies a new set of targets outlining the global goals to achieve regarding the natural environment in the planning period. Essentially, it could be considered the SDGs for the natural environment. From 2010 to 2020, these were the Acai biodiversity targets. The follow-up to this, called the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, or GBF, which was approved in December 2022 at the CBD COP15 following the COVID-19 pandemic and ongoing negotiations. At this COP, it was also decided that all countries' parties would revise, update, or develop NBSAPs to align with the new GBF. And again, the GBF is the new Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, as stated just shortly, and submit these to CBD before the next COP, which was at a time October 2024. And of course, in it, it states, national biodiversity strategies and action plans revised or updated in alignment with the framework and its goals and targets as the main vehicle for implementation of the framework, including national targets communicated in a standardized format. This timing aligned well with the need to renew the previous nature policy plan, which was valid 2021 to 2025. Even though we signed onto the convention as an individual country within the kingdom, we are still a single party to the convention as the Kingdom of the Netherlands. For this reason, NBSAPs must be established for the European Netherlands, the Caribbean Netherlands, the BEST, Aruba, Curaçao, and Sint Maarten. Due to the very different natural environments and levels of autonomy within the kingdom, it has been decided that we could all make separate NBSAPs. Next slide, the Global Biodiversity Framework. To give you an impression of the Global Biodiversity Framework, the GBF, I have included this table overview of the targets. The GBF has 23 targets to be achieved by 2030. If you group them, they fall under 3 categories. The first one, reducing threats to biodiversity. The second, meeting people's needs through sustainable use and benefit sharing. The third, tools and solutions for implementing and mainstream. All these targets must take into consideration an approach inclusive of the following: whole of government and whole of society. Without going into much detail of these targets, I would like to highlight some for your attention I think are really important and relevant for Sint Maarten. So under category 1, reducing threats to biodiversity, we can look at, for example, reducing impacts of invasive species, reducing pollution risks, and minimizing the impact of climate change. Under category 2, meeting people's needs through sustainable use and benefit sharing, we can look at restoring, maintaining, and enhancing nature's contribution to the people, including ecosystem functions, and improving human health and well-being with biodiversity-inclusive urban planning. And finally, under tools and solutions, full integration of biodiversity into policies, regulations, planning, public-private partnerships and resource mobilization, and finally, availability of and access to data. In this next slide, and of course before proceeding into the details of the Nature Policy Plan, we first want to clear what the Nature Policy Plan does not cover. I think that's really important. Since the development of nature and environmental policy plans of the Netherlands Antilles, there has been a distinction between an environment. Environment pertains to the gray subjects of waste management, energy, soil pollution, water quality, and so forth. Meanwhile, nature specifically addresses the green and blue subjects of species protection, habitat conservation, the monitoring and management of protected areas, and any direct threats thereto. Since these two areas are inextricably linked, it is the intention to complement this policy with the formation of a separate environmental policy plan. However, it should be noted that there is only one national legally requirement to develop a nature policy plan, as just outlined in the legal framework. As the Netherlands Antilles, the difference between the nature and environment subject areas were established. However, the two policy plans were initially merged into one document. See bottom image of Nature and Environmental Policy Plan of the Netherlands Antilles. These were eventually separated, and on the top left-hand corner of the slide, you can see the Nature Policy Plan of the Caribbean Netherlands 2013-2017. However, the Caribbean Netherlands has recently decided to merge these back together in their recent Nature and Environmental Policy Plan 2020-2030 and extend implementation from 5 to 10 years, which is in line with the biodiversity strategies of the CBD. Of course, referencing again the ACAI targets and the new GBF. While we are here today to discuss the approval of update of the Nature Policy Plan for Sint Maarten, we do recognize the need for the Environmental Policy Plan and want to make it clear that we fully acknowledge the work that needs to be done in the environmental sphere of Sint Maarten, and acknowledge that a poorly managed environment directly impacts all areas of the nature sphere. However, for the purpose of this discussion today, we will narrow our focus on the topics relevant to the Nature Policy Plan. Before diving into the updated policy plan, we wish to take a step back and briefly introduce the previous Nature Plan and go over its implementation achievements. The previous Nature Policy Plan for the period 2021-2025 contained 9 overall policy objectives, which you will see outlined here. As required by the National Legal Framework, it also has complementary and separate Nature Plan to detailed implementation of these policy objectives. This Nature Policy Plan functioned as the NBSAP within the requirements of the CBD because it was aligned with the biodiversity targets and with the initial drafts updated. This Nature Policy Plan was prepared based on drafts that had been in preparation within the ministry since 2016 and were then further developed in consultation with relevant stakeholders until it was eventually finalized in 2021. This delay in preparation to finalization was due in part to staff turnover at the time, and of course, Hurricane Irma. The Nature Policy Plan was also given a 1-month public review period for the community to provide any feedback. During this period, some feedback was received and worked into the draft, which was then sent to the Minister of Romy. Upon ministerial approval of that draft, it was then sent to Parliament. Following recommendations from the colleagues from the Caribbean, Netherlands, and Dutch Caribbean, this version of the Nature Policy Plan was sent to Parliament for their information. While the Ministry remained open to meeting with Parliament to discuss the approval of the Nature Policy Plan, this did not happen. And after some public discussion, a Central Committee meeting of Parliament was held in April 2024 discussing the implementation status of the Nature Policy Plan 2021-2025, which, yes. An outcome of this meeting was that before the Minister of Romy can present the Nature Policy Plan to Parliament for approval, all queries raised by the members of Parliament must be addressed. The then Minister of Romy requested a 2-week time frame to provide written responses to the questions posed. However, due to the parliamentary elections that followed right after, the change of government, and the demissionaire caretaker status of the government during the election period, a follow-up meeting of Parliament was not held, and nature policy was not able to be approved by Parliament. For this reason, the formal reporting of status of the implementation to Parliament did not take place, as new documents were approved by Parliament during the implementation period. While this structuring reporting on the status of implementation of the Nature Policy Plan and Nature Policy had not taken place, we have taken the liberty to include a quick impact visualization of the status of implementation of the different overarching policy objectives. What we have come to realize during the 5 years implementing the previous Nature Policy Plan is that the progress to achieve the goals of the policy have been somewhat slower than we were anticipating or hoping. This has been in part due to human capacity constraints in the ministry, impacts to COVID-19, limited operational budget, and the complexities of accessing external financing to implement projects. As you can see, some objectives are relatively advanced in the implementation, while most are lagging behind quite significantly. This means that some of these activities of the Nature Policy Plan could be taken up in the updated Nature Policy Plan to be presented today. Now that we understand the legal framework around the Nature Policy Plan and have had the update on the previous Nature Policy Plan and its implementation status, we will now go into the updated Nature Policy Plan for the period 2025 to 2030, which we are here to present today to begin its formal process of parliamentary approval. The development of the updated Nature Plan 2025-2030 was supported by the Ministry of LVVN of the Netherlands, that's of course Ministerie van Landbouw, Visserij, Voedsel, Zekerheid en Natuur. So in short, in English, Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries, Food Security, and Nature. This support was mobilized through the recently signed MOU establishing formal cooperation between Sint Maarten's Ministries of Romy and Teat, LVVN of the Netherlands, the Ministry of Transportation, Integrity, Nature, and of Aruba, TINO, and the Ministry of Gesondheid, Milieu en Natuur, GMN of Curaçao. The Ministry of LVVN decided to mobilize this support through the MOU because even though we sign into the convention CBD as an individual country within the kingdom, we are still a single party to the convention as the Kingdom of the Netherlands. So in short, we all have our separate implementation plans to this convention. Yeah. The purpose of this MOU is to support mutual assistance, cooperation, and consultation in the areas of common competence, specifically the protection, management, and utilization of natural resources. 2, strengthening food security through the sustainable development of agriculture and fisheries. And 3, part in an effective implementation of the relevant international conventions and organizations. Because we have just seen the questions posed by MP York on this specific MOU, which was one of the outstanding questions that we have to respond to, we just want to mention here that the MOU is active following the instatement of the PVV, VVD, NS, and BB coalition in the Netherlands in 2024. This coalition came into power relatively shortly after the initial signing of the MOU between Aruba, TINO, and KNL LVVN with the previous coalition government. As such, beyond the drafted MOU and the draft action program developed for its implementation, the implementation of the MOU and its actions is largely paused or on a go-slow. We hope the implementation will be sped up by following the reinstatement of the new government of the Netherlands in the formation process currently, with additional capacity received by the Ministry of LVVN. That said, we will formally respond to the questions, of course, posed by MP York within short. The assignment to produce the NBSAPs for the Dutch Caribbean islands was given to Twinstragoeda by the Ministry of LVVN. They were tasked to support Aruba, Curaçao, and Sint Maarten to develop their own NBSAPs based on the new framework, and to build from the national nature policy plans when available. Indicative outline NBSAPs and proposed by the GBF. To assist in drafting NBSAPs, the GBF has provided an indicative outline of what the NBSAP should include, as they want the NBSAPs reported in a somewhat standardized format. Since some of the activities of the previous nature policy could also be taken up in the updated nature policy plan, the question was then, how in alignment was the nature policy plan with the GBF? For this, the Twinstragoeda did an analysis, and this overview summarizes the findings. It shows what percentage of the previous nature policy plan already covered the required information. Essentially, what percentage of the updated nature policy plan was already written. As we were, as we were already aware of the initial draft BF when doing the draft policy plan, there's already a great deal of alignment within. The areas that needed further elaboration were the last 2 sections concerning the implementation plans and institutional monitoring and reporting. Here is the breakdown by the 23 targets of the GBF. In the dark yellow, orange, and light yellow, orange are targets that needed to be strengthened. Unless they are not a priority for Sint Maarten, they do not specifically need to be addressed in the NBSAP Nature Policy Plan. You can see that there was already a great deal of alignment with only some targets needing strengthening that were also considered a priority for Sint Maarten. Following the process to update the Nature Policy Plan with support from the consultants from Twinstragoeda, we can say that the NBSAP, the updated version, is largely unchanged from the previous Nature Policy Plan 2021-2025. We want to just quickly highlight some main changes that did occur. The Nature Policy Plan, Natuurbeleid, and Nature Plan, Natuurplan, have been merged into one document. An additional Chapter 4, ensuring effective implementation, was created. Actions have been updated, including timelines, and some actions have been added to further align with the GBF. Some actions within the different policy objectives have also been reorganized. Like the other countries in the kingdom, it was decided to still Nature Policy Plan 2025-2030, and this thus means it functions as an NBSAP. Here is an overview of the table of contents, chapters of the updated Nature Policy Plan. Chapter 2 and 3 are the Natuurbeleidsplan, outlining the actual policy and guiding principles. The newly added Chapter 4 outlines the enabling conditions in order to ensure effective implementation. This chapter is saying that without certain conditions, the action of the Nature Policy Plan cannot be achieved. This includes conditions such as ensuring sufficient staffing for the ministry, budget to execute the actions, and ensuring a robust legislative framework. And lastly, the Appendix 1 is a nature plan, the Natuurplan, outlining the more actions to achieve the policy objectives. This is the vision of the updated Nature Policy Plan 2025-2030. It's unchanged from the previous Nature Policy Plan. This vision works to promote a shift attitude, a future where the value of the nation's natural resources and statistics are fully appreciated and sustainably managed, especially in terms of its contribution to economic well-being, strengthening resilience to natural disasters, and supporting human well-being. From perceiving the protection and conservation of nature as a hindrance to economic development towards one that views nature as an essential asset for the sustainable development of Sint Maarten. Here you can see an overview of the 9 policy objectives and the small changes that were made for the updated Nature Policy Plan 2025-2030, the NAPSAP. They are largely unchanged as stated, with only minor adjustments in wording of 2 policy objectives with the asterisk mark, but the intention remains the same. And those are, of course, Policy Objective 3 and Policy Objective 6. Now, slide 23, just to preface, slide 23 until slide 35 basically outlines each and every policy with what has been the focus of it and, of course, what has been achieved in each of those policy objectives. So the next 10 slides I'll go through, but they are very much just breaking down what we've just said and what we've achieved throughout. So we will now outline, as I stated, and discuss briefly each of these policy objectives and their plan outputs, as well as present some of the achievements already achieved to date. The first policy objective is focused on species protection, establishing protected areas, restoring and protecting ecosystems. It aims for the increased conservation, restoration, and management of biodiversity. What you see here are the proposed outcomes and outputs for the policy objectives. The outcomes represent the ultimate change that the policy aims to yield, and the outputs are the measurable effects of the policy presented within a timeline. The idea is that the execution of the outputs will eventually lead to the desired policy outcome, achieving the overall policy objective and thus the vision of this Nature Policy Plan. The 2 first outcomes of this policy objectives are to strengthen local conservation, protection of endangered, threatened, or endemic species and ecosystems. 1.2, strengthen the protection of biodiversity from the impacts of invasive species. Outputs planned include developing an island-specific red list and to create additional legislation to protect these sensitive species, strengthening the management and enforcement of CITES Convention, this is the handling import-export of sensitive species, joining the Dutch Caribbean Marine Mammal Sanctuary, establishing invasive species management plans, and integrating principles to reduce the negative impacts of pollution into policy. Achievements to date include the Nature Foundation recently initiated to draft the island-specific red list, work towards joining the Marine Mammal Sanctuary, increased funding to the Nature Foundation to support invasive species management, and the update of the environmental norms currently in process. Another goal of species protection is to limit the impact of invasive. This will work to identify and manage invasive species through establishing management plans as necessary. PO, Policy Objective 1, continued. On the theme of areas, the goal is to protect 30% of land and sea by 2030, in line with the goals of the GBF. Following recent efforts to establish Little Key as a protected area, we have learned that the current flaws and inconsistencies in our legal framework prevent the effective establishment of protected areas in nature parks. That means, in essence, we can't actually enforce it. As such, we launched a request for proposals for legal support to amend overarching legal framework, including the National Ordinance on the Foundations of Nature Management and Protection to allow effective nature park designation. The legal consultants have been selected, and we are moving towards mobilizing their assistance in the coming months. Alongside this project, the Nature Foundation has also mobilized funds that will develop the national decrees under this updated legal framework to support designation of protected areas, the nature parks. The last outcome of the policy objective is to maintain and improve biodiversity through ecosystem restoration. Steps have been taken through Project Corina, which have identified the degraded ecosystems during their baseline biodiversity assessments that were finalized in 2024-2025. Policy Objective 2, improve research and provide evidence base for effective policy. This second policy objective this works towards improved research and monitoring of our natural environment to support effective policy development. While Corina conducted baseline biodiversity assessments, it is important to repeat these assessments on a regular basis, give or take every 4 to 5 years, to continuously inform policy and management practices. Additional identified studies include an updated report on the state of the pond and additional economic valuation of St. Martin's natural resources. Project Corina also conducted socioeconomic valuation of the marine and coastal environment, covering the ecosystem services of fisheries, tourism, carbon stock sequestration, pictured at the bottom of the slide. However, it is also important to repeat these valuations with time to continuously inform policy and management practices. The last outcome under the policy objective is the active monitoring to maintain an evidence base for effective policy creation. With the increased funding being given to Nature Foundation with their new updated management agreement, they will be able to have capacity to conduct routine monitoring of sensitive and indicator species. Policy Objective 3. The third policy objective focuses on the increased resilience and sustainability of the tourism sector. As tourism is our largest economic pillar, it should be very logical that we should include policy objectives towards the sustainability of this sector. The goals are to stimulate participation in eco-labels to ensure sustainability of businesses and operations in this sector. We also work towards creating tourism-based information streams and eco-tourism abilities. Some achievements to date have been the reinstatement of the Blue Flag and Green Key eco-label programs in 2024, with the first Green Key establishment receiving their award in 2025. There are also 2 final stages of receiving their Blue Flag awards. There's also notable achievement on the recent birding platform that has been installed in Nature Foundation on the Great Salt Pond. The ministry played a supporting role in this with grant writing and approval to place the platform. There's also work currently underway to install birding platforms on the Fresh Pond. PO3 continued. Additional outcomes under this policy objective include the promotion of sustainable agricultural practices, the knowledge of local fisheries, and working towards sustainable management of fisheries resources. Achievements to date mainly include the recent work by the Nature Foundation on their project, MENA. Through this project, they have been working to better understand the state of fisheries on St. Maarten, educate fishermen on fishing practices, create education awareness materials, and to work to develop fisheries marine park management plans. Lastly, through the MOU with the Ministry of LVVN, work will begin shortly to improve the management of the Dutch Caribbean Exclusive Economic Zone. Policy Objective 4. The fourth objective focuses on increased communication, education, and public awareness of nature, why it's so important that the school was here this morning. The 2 outcomes of this policy objective are to increase awareness on nature issues across government and publicly, and to work towards the centralized and easy public accessibility of information related to nature and the environment. While quite ambitious, an intended output is to make the population more aware of the value and vulnerability of nature on St. Maarten and to create specialized teaching materials that could be integrated into the school system. To work towards this increased awareness, Project Corina had a large education outreach component that was led by Nature Foundation, and further efforts by the Nature Foundation include the MP4 project, focusing on mangrove protection, and a recent collaboration with SHTA and the airport, focusing on conch shell awareness. The last output is to have information related to environment centralized in an easy, accessible, dedicated website. Project Corina did support the Nature Foundation to update their website so it can better represent the information for St. Maarten's natural environment. Notable is also the recent launch of the Climate Impact Atlas for St. Maarten, which includes the nature and environment of St. Maarten. However, it would also be a goal to centralize all this information into one dedicated nature website or a page or on a link to the government's website. Policy Objective 5, we have about 9, so thank you for your patience. The 5th policy objective is to realize legal improvements to reflect the current situation with effective enforcement. The outcomes under this policy objective are the following. The first, policy and legislation related to nature are robust, comprehensive, updated to the current context. And 2, improved enforcement of policy and legislation related to nature. Outputs to achieve these outcomes include working to establish national legislation for protected areas, steps made towards reviewing and updated current national policies and laws linked to nature and environment, and steps made towards the creation of additional policy and legal legislation concerning nature values. Example, ban on single-use plastics. As previously mentioned, we are working to contract legal assistance to amend the current national ordinance on the foundations of nature management and protection to allow effective nature park designation. The Nature Foundation has also recently submitted a draft national decree to protect red and black mangroves. This is currently in the review process at the Policy Department and will be submitted into the legal review process shortly. Policy objective number 6. The 6th policy objective calls for the integration of nature into development strategies. The outcome under this policy objectives are: the first, impacts to nature and environment, assessed before select developmental projects. 2, nature recognized and harnessed as a tool to address certain societal challenges. Outputs under these outcomes include the improved collection and public accessibility of geospatial data of natural values for planning and decision-making, ensuring that the value of nature is integrated into urban planning, working to make environmental impact assessments mandatory for select development activities, as well as strengthening the process for civil works permits and hindrance permits. Key achievements to date include the recently published Climate Impact Atlas for St. Maarten, which is a public portal for geospatial data on the island. Project Corina also collected a wealth of spatial data, which is now also publicly available and displayed in the Climate Impact Atlas. Project Corina also developed the Civil Works Procedure Manual to improve civil works permit processes, and the environmental norms are currently being updated to be used in the hindrance permit procedure. Policy objective number 7. The 7th policy objective calls for increased local, regional, international cooperation for nature. The outcomes under this policy objective include increasing local cooperation, increasing cooperation with St. Maarten, increasing cooperation with the Kingdom of the Netherlands, but also increasing cooperation with the region and internationally. Some achievements to date include the MOU recently signed between the Fondation des Réserves Naturelles, as well as the cooperation structure developed at the level of the 2 governments. Another achievement, of course, as previously stated, the MOU signed between VROMI, TEAT, LVVN, TINO, and GMN in Aruba and Curacao. Policy objective number 8. The 8th policy objective calls for the integration of nature into development strategies. The outcomes on this policy objective are increased awareness of the financial needs for increased amount of national financing reserve for nature, and increased financing for nature through compensation. The goal would be to assess the needs and to increase financing, both through government's own reserves as possible, but mainly to set up frameworks and mechanisms for independent financing. One method could be establishing a compensation framework to ensure that future damaging developments are assessed, for example, through EIAs, environmental impact assessments, and environmental compensation paid out according to the framework. Achievements to date include a National Biodiversity Financial Assessment, an NBFP, currently in development with the support of Grant Thornton with the MOU with LVVN, and the recently increased budget allocation to the Nature Foundation, which will support the execution of this nature policy plan. Then we have the final policy objective number 9. The 9th and final policy objective calls for the integration of climate change into national planning and nature harness for adaptation. The outcomes of this policy objective are ongoing and enhanced climate data collection to support the understanding of localized climate impacts. 2, current and future impacts of climate change understood and incorporated into planning and decision-making, so really speaking about the need for data and evidence-based decision-making. And finally, nature harness as a tool to adapt to impacts of climate change. Outputs of this policy objective include working towards the more regular collection of several climate indicators at several locations on the island to develop a report on the impacts of climate change for Sint Maarten, leading towards a national climate change strategy, as well as the published ecosystem-based adaptation EBA plan created. Achievements to date include the ongoing procurement of total weather stations through the NRPB, the recent publication, as of the climate scenarios for Sint Maarten, and of course the recent launch of the Climate Impact Atlas for Sint Maarten. We are also currently working on drafting a national climate change adaptation report and initiating work on national climate change adaptation strategy, NAS-SXM. Now, following those 9 policy objectives, this new chapter has been added provides the critical steps for the successful implementation of the Nature Policy Plan for Sint Maarten. It begins by acknowledging the challenges to implementation and highlights the importance of establishing enabling conditions before initiating actions. There is no doubt that successfully implementing the entirety of the Nature Policy Plan will be complex and a challenging endeavor for Sint Maarten. While the strategy outlines ambitious and essential policy objectives for nature and biodiversity conservation, translating these plans into tangible actions requires significant effort and, of course, coordination. It is crucial to acknowledge these difficulties up front and approach the implementation process with a realistic yet determined mindset. Enabling conditions for implementation. As such, this chapter recognizes that before actual implementation can take place, it is essential to first establishing enabling conditions. For Sint Maarten, the 4 most important enabling conditions identified are 1, government capacity, 2, sustainable funding and investments, legislation and data for implementation, 3, shared values to develop in harmony with nature, and 4, a strong coordinating structure. A lack of these conditions or a minimized provision of will impede progress on implementation of the policy objectives of this nature policy. As such, this chapter essentially describes the essential priority actions required to advance on the enabling conditions for the implementation of this nature policy plan. These priority actions are outlined in 4 tables, outlining actions to achieve each of the enabling conditions. The bottom of this slide, you can see a part of these tables for your review. Chapter 5 of the Nature Policy Plan. Chapter 5 outlines the monitoring and evaluation of this policy. In essence, progress towards achieving the policy objectives is measured using the output and effect indicators. Measuring the effect indicators can be quite challenging due to qualitative impacts and limited baseline data. However, to the degree possible, annual reviews will assess budget effectiveness and activity schedules and indicate if any updates to this policy are needed based on experience and capacity changes. Following amendments to the Ordinance on the Foundations of Nature Management and Protection, this chapter may also be updated to reflect any changes to the approval and reporting process of the Nature Policy Plan. And then finally, the Appendix 1, the Action Plan. In the interest of time, we will not go into depth in the Nature Plan, portion of the document. Essentially, the nature plan is an implementation or action plan for the policy. It puts forward the proposed activities to achieve each output. Additionally, it identifies the key stakeholders, puts forward budgetary indications, and prioritizes actions. This will not be the most interesting section of this document for the general population, but will be a useful tool for relevant managers, policy advisors, and of course, decision makers. So next steps. Now we've discussed the actual contents of the nature policy plan, we will go into how do we actually mobilize and move this forward. So, as you're probably aware, the updated Nature Policy Plan 2025-2030 was sent to Parliament for approval in December 2024, according to our system. However, we were made aware that it's only received by Parliament in late 2025. Despite this delay, ultimately, we would like to avoid a situation that occurred with the approval, hoot-curting, of Nature Policy 2021-2025. The SGF Parliament has provided us with an overview of the proposed route for the approval of this Nature Policy Plan. Today, we are at the first step with the Central Committee meeting, where the plan is presented to Parliament and questions will be asked. We remain committed to the full 4 steps to see this Nature Policy Plan through its approval hoot-curting process. Once nationally approved, we also have to ensure the Nature Policy Plan completes its international requirements, originating from, of course, mentioned the International UN Convention on Biological Diversity, or the CBD. As such, we will have to submit to the Ministry of LVVN, the Netherlands, who will then upload to the CBD online reporting tool, managed by the Secretariat of the Convention of CBD. Once uploaded, it becomes publicly accessible on the CBD's website. The CBD will not approve or reject the NBSAP, but they may check it for its completeness and clarity. The CBD tracks progress of all NBSAP implementations through the national reports, which are submitted every 4 years. The next national report, the 7th national report, is due on February 28, 2026. We are currently working on this national report with some minor assistance from the Ministry of LVVN. This is the first report under the new GBF, and it's proving quite complicated for many countries. So we anticipate that a new reporting framework will come out before the 8th reporting cycle. Another requirement for the GBF is for nations to develop a National Biodiversity Finance Plan, an NBFP. We do love acronyms, to detail how they will finance the implementation of the NBSAPs. Significantly increasing domestic resource mobilization, facilitated by the preparation and implementation of national biodiversity finance plans, are similar instruments according to national needs, priorities, and circumstances. This can be found in Target 19, Sub B. As such, the Ministry of LVVN, through the recently signed MOU that we were previously discussed, has mobilized Grant Thornton to support Aruba, Curacao, and Sint Maarten to develop the National Biodiversity Finance Frameworks, NBFP. We anticipated the first draft of the NBFP be finalized by Grant Thornton in Q2 of this year. However, there will still be a significant amount of work to finalize the NBFP, the financial plan for Sint Maarten, and we may need to mobilize more support for this. With that, I'd like to thank this Honorable House for your time, and we look forward to receiving your questions related to the Nature Policy Plan 2025-2030.
Thank you very much, Minister Patrice Gums, for that presentation on the Nature Policy Plan. Members of Parliament, I'll adjourn for 2 minutes before we go over to allowing you, of course, to take the floor on this topic as presented by the Minister. So we'll adjourn just for 2 minutes, and then we go over to the Members of Parliament. Meeting adjourned. back to this Central Committee meeting of Parliament, in which we're discussing the proposed nature policy plan as presented by the Ministry of Romy. Minister of Romy, Patrice Gomes, is here with his support staff. He has presented this nature policy plan, and we now have the opportunity for members of Parliament to ask questions regarding the topic and the presentation made by the minister. I look at an indication and I haven't seen any member. Now I do see several members looking to take the floor on this matter, and I start with MP Veronica Janssen-Webster. MP Janssen-Webster, you have the floor.
Good morning, Chair Lady, and good morning to my colleagues and also to the Minister and his support staff. I only have a few short questions, more about enforcement, current enforcement, because I saw mention about training staff of Romy, and I must say that I saw mention of training at least one Romy staff. I think that with the turnover in government, you should maybe, I would advise the Minister through you, Madam Chair, to train more than one staff, so that you always have the continuity of the knowledge, and you have the knowledge transfer in the department. But currently, what is being done for enforcement when it regards nature protection? And I was interested because I saw a picture of the coral, the staghorn coral, or the coral that's in KB. What is the situation now? Has anyone looked to see if since the development of the area in KB, in Indigo, if we still have that specific coral that was deemed on the list, the international list? And then another question about having also to do with Indigo Bay, what is being put in place to ensure that the developments in tourism go hand in hand or take nature into consideration? That's all I have for now. Thank you.
Thank you, MP Janssen-Webster. The next MP to speak is MP Doran. MP Doran, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you, Minister and team, for the presentation thus far. I have a few points of clarification, and also what I realized, Madam Chair, to us as members of Parliament, as ministers, we have to really take into consideration the fact that the public doesn't have all this information. So although I might know some things, I just want to ask it so it could be clear to the public how and what. For instance, Madam Chair, through you, in the spirit of continuity, I would like to know what key principles or approaches from the previous nature policy framework has been carried over from the ministry into this current one. I know the 9 objectives were projected, but I want to know if there's any other key principles that were taken over that continues, because for me it kind of looked basically the same. So if you can highlight those or highlight the differences so that it could be clear as to what the changes are or the similarities. The next point I have, Madam Chair, is the plan states that the nature consideration must be taken into account when the decisions are made about development and land use. In practical terms, when a permit application is reviewed today, what are the main environmental factors that you personally focus on before the decision is made? Reason why I ask that, Madam Chair, is because sometimes different people get different responses. So I would just like some clarification on that. The plan also is to recognize the pressure that comes with limited land space in Sint Maarten. I mean, that is our reality. How does the ministry manage the pressure of differently, how does the ministry handle the pressure of, let's say, for instance, across different districts, knowing that some areas can handle more development of others? The plan also refers to a cumulative effect of development over time. How does the ministry look at the overall impact in areas where development has happened gradually over many years, if that has been considered as well? Madam Chair, through you, I see that several areas have been identified in the plan as important for conservation. Which of these areas is it your ministry most focused on in protecting at this time? And what make those areas a priority in the opinion of the professionals or different studies that were conducted, if those points can be highlighted? Through you, Madam Chair, during my term as minister, the council approved the establishment of Little Key as a nature park, a protected nature park in the Sims Bay Lagoon. And it was also as a way to formally protect the sensitive natural area. Building on the same idea and safeguarding key locations, is the minister currently considering any other areas that may require formal protection or designation as a green or conservation zone? Related to that, how does the ministry decide when an area needs stronger protection rather than the general policy guidelines? I would like to know how those decisions are made when it comes to allowing or not allowing certain things in terms of development. Minister, everyone understands the need for housing. How do you balance the need with the responsibility to protect natures where both pressures exist by side, in the sense of we need development because there's a shortage, and also in terms of protecting the environment? Madam Chair, through you, when it comes to the hillside areas, the plans that make clear that these locations are more vulnerable because of the erosion and the water runoff. How do you determine when a hillside area is becoming too heavily built up, even if the land is already owned, or privately owned, then I should say, and individuals want to develop? Is government considering certain reimbursement or land swaps? I know that land is limited, so I would like to know the thinking of the ministry in that regard, because I know those conversations came up a lot in the past, where someone would apply for a building permit, and based on their area, it's not allowed, and then how do you move forward from there? And we also have to take into consideration, through you, Madam Chair, that there's no official zoning laws at the moment, because I know people talk a lot about draft, and when it comes down to it, we could practice things and it could be the custom, but if there's no official law, it still leaves a gap in terms of establishing the way forward. So that is my point, why I would like clarity on that one. Also, through you, Madam Chair, the plan mentions protecting the natural look and the character of the island. How does the ministry consider the visual impact, such as a building on high points, when reviewing development proposals? The plan also emphasizes the importance of enforcement. Which types of developments or which areas are currently receiving the most attention when it comes to the inspections and compliance? I move on, through you, Madam Chair. At times, there are trade-offs between economic benefits and environmental protection. How does the ministry weigh those choices when they come into conflict? Because I can tell you for a fact that that has always been a contention, because you have to be the Minister of Development and Environment. In my personal opinion, I think we should split those things, because if you look at Curacao, I believe it is, environment goes hand in hand with health. And that is a more easier balance, because then you separate the one person that has to make a conflicting decision. So I'd like to know how those decisions are handled, if an example or examples can be given in that regard. Also, through you, Madam Chair, I would like to know, by the end of this policy period, which is 2020, what are the clear or visible changes should the people of St. Maarten expect to see if balance between development and environment protection is being managed properly? So what is the goal at the end of this traject should the people of St. Maarten expect in that regard? Madam Chair, I've been very vocal on the whole civil works permit discussion, because I could remember it was a big discussion here publicly as well, because of a particular development that has been taking place. I'm getting more and more complaints from individuals that this is being handled on a sort of a favoritism basis, meaning to say, I remember the minister stating that every construction project requires a civil works permit. I would like to know, through you, Madam Chair, in the last year, so month by month, how many civil works permits were requested and how many were issued? And is it still being done on a case-by-case, I would use the word favoritism basis, or is it mandatory and everyone is required to do that before they do what we call a groundbreaking to build their home and or project, whatever they choose to do. Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I look forward to the responses.
Thank you very much, MP Duran. The next MP to speak is MP York. MP York, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Once again, good afternoon to yourself, the griffier, the minister and support staff, and the viewing public. Madam Chair, before I start, I share my questions, I pose my questions. I would like to comment on give my comment based on something, a statement that the minister said initially, alluding to the fact that my colleague, with his statement that letters and meetings are going unheard and unanswered by the minister, to which the minister stated that there are only a few letters and only one meeting request. Madam Chair, let the facts be known. Once something is submitted here in Parliament, for example, letters to the ministers or meeting requests, they are registered with the IS number, identification number of the document. And here before me, I have IS 1302, IS 415, IS 853, IS 1057, IS 1319, IS 373, IS 276, IS 277, IS 187, IS 1298, IS 406, IS 405. Madam Chair, these are facts. These are all meetings and letters that have been sent to the minister over the past year that has not been replied to, adhered to, or even respected. And going back on the one point of the minister stating that there's only one meeting request, Madam Chair, from those IS numbers, IS 1057 was about housing, was a meeting about housing. IS 406 is a meeting about infrastructure and road network, in simple terms, traffic congestion. IS 405 is about flood management and drainage. Madam Chair, I can't make this up. So to elude that my colleague is simply misrepresenting the truth, the facts contradicts the statement that the minister made so thoroughly that it is difficult for me to figure out whether it was made in good faith or not. But in either case, Madam Chair, these are the facts. Letters are sent, meetings are requested, and the minister comes to things that he wants to come for. For example, this nature policy plan meeting came on a docket after the housing meeting request, and yet no meeting. The minister also referenced that the housing meeting was placed on the docket in December and then taken off, Madam Chair, and also that the policy was not ready when the meeting request was initially made. Madam Chair, if a policy is far enough to disclose it on the Tribune and in the Herald, then it's far enough for you to come to Parliament and explain it to the people. So, Madam Chair, I just wanted to correct that with facts and not hearsay. And with that being said, I'll be moving on to my questions. Minister, with that being said, I'd like to thank you for your presentation. I must say the presentation is ambitious, but our job as Parliament is to check whether the written policy can actually deliver what the slides promise. And also, in preparation of this meeting, I was going through the policy plan, or the nature policy, and I let someone that was sitting down next to me just breeze through it. And they said, you know, MP, this comes over as gibberish to me. Not calling the content gibberish, but the average person does not understand or can follow, for example, the presentation I just given. Nothing against you guys, but it's a fact, right? So I said, you know what, I'm going to pose questions in layman's terms so people that are watching can actually understand what they just watched, and if they want to watch it over again, they can watch it over again and have a better understanding. With that being said, Madam Chair, through you, Minister, a very much a conflicting topic over the last couple of years has been development versus nature, right? So once this policy and this plan is instated, for example, when a big developer and nature would clash, how does this plan and policy alleviate the tensions and the current discussions that are mostly had between developers and the ministry now? And what things in that document guarantees a better outcome? Are there any areas on this island where development will simply be refused, yes or no? And if yes, where? And if no, what exactly is being protected? Because I saw percentages like 30%, et cetera, and seeing that this is both the policy and the plan, if the minister can further elaborate on that, seeing that it's both the policy and the plan, I didn't see the plan to what is going to be protected. Climate, hurricane resilience is acknowledged, but not yet operationalized in the provided pages. So in the summary notes, hurricane, storms, sea level effects, and vulnerability, yet in the provided section, we can't see how climate adaptation is embedded into spatial planning, coastal setbacks, watershed restoration, and capital works. Where does this plan change what VROMI approves next month, basically, if a permit were to come in? And basically a follow-up to that, what changes in how permits are approved starting, let's say, next month, once this plan and policy is implemented because of this plan? What changes tangibly? How does this plan reduce flooding, erosion, or storm damage that people experience every rainy season? If another major hurricane were to hit tomorrow, I understand that this is not a disaster plan, a disaster management plan, but what in this plan changes the way we prepare and or recover? Since nature doesn't stop at the border, what concrete agreements exist with the French side to enforce protection together? Through you, Madam Chair, what changes tomorrow for people who dump garbage, cut hillsides, or damage mangroves? Are there higher fines, more inspections, faster penalties? What can we pull out of this plan/policy that can answer any one of these questions? And again, I understand that the environmental part has been separated, and right now is the nature plan and nature policy, but we do have a existing environmental plan, if I understood the minister correctly. So if the minister could elaborate further on that. Seeing that there is an environmental plan and nature plan existing before the newly updated one, where the two were split, can the minister tell Parliament how many environmental fines were issued last year and how many of these fines were actually collected? Because we can speak now about updating policies and making new policies, but what is being done with the existing ones? There are many stakeholders that, I think the minister alluded to that as well, that are part or should be part of this. For example, not only VROMI, but you have TIAT, you have Justice, you have the Port, you have the Coast Guard, you have Department of Public Health. What are their binding responsibilities as part of this plan or policy? The presentation admits enforcement has been weak in the past, yet the policy document does not clearly state how many inspectors will be added, when, and with what powers. So concretely, changes on the ground. So what concretely changes on the ground are to be expected after this plan is approved? Again, a lot of these questions are also for the people at home to understand what we are here discussing today. The presentation emphasizes international obligations and deadlines such as CBD, COP16. Is this policy primarily being driven by international reporting pressure or by a clear domestic plan to fix local problems like dumping, erosion, mangroves loss, etc.? How do we tell the difference between the two? The presentation promises better integration of nature into development and mandatory EIAs. Can the minister confirm from which date EIAs will actually become mandatory and which types of developments will no longer be approved without them? Through you, Madam Chair, the presentation acknowledges limited baseline data, challenging indicators. If you cannot clearly measure today's starting point, how will Parliament objectively judge the success or failure in 2028 or 2030? How can we objectively judge the success if we don't have a clear starting point? The presentation speaks confidently about annual reporting to Parliament. If future reports show that targets are not being met, what corrective action is built into the policy? What actually happens next? Or does the plan simply continue regardless of the results? And in closing, Madam Chair, the presentation highlights clear targets like 30% protected, 30% restored. Where in the written policy is it clearly stated in which areas, and I asked this question earlier, but I'll ask again for good measure, will be protected or restored, and what happens if those targets are missed, seeing that this is both the policy and the plan? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, MP York. The next MP to speak is MP Irian. MP Irian, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Madam Chair, I believe it was mentioned that through the minister that the idea is that this policy is approved by Parliament. There's one confirmation on that. That's the idea. Yes. Last year is that? Okay, perfect. So after the CC goes to OVE, I'm assuming? Okay. Madam Chair, in the presentation for the minister mentioned points of civil works permits, excavation permits as part of the policy. And I have a serious concern with that because I believe in the manner the ministry is currently operating, civil works permits and excavation permits, maybe, and I'll even dare to say building permits, almost looks like favoritism. We have one big development that's public in Kopokoi that is being criticized or scrutinized based on their civil works permit and also their excavation permit. But sometimes I wonder if the minister, the cabinet, if they drive around the island, because when I go and ask certain individuals if they have these excavation or civil works permits, right, they say no. So if we have a policy in place, but currently already, right, the ministry is not operating in a fair manner where you're saying, hey, and the minister made it clear already on the floor of Parliament that every single building permit requires a civil works permit, but yet still, permits are now going out without civil works permit. People are building now without civil works permit. So if that's the case, if the minister states on the floor of Parliament, every single one needs it, right, but yet still is scrutinizing one and another other, then it becomes favoritism. In addition to that, Madam Chair, it's nice to have a policy, but what I would not be approving is a policy that the government cannot execute. I see in the policy it mentions all of the invasive species in St. Maarten, etc. But again, go back to the same topic of the monkeys, right? What's the point of having a policy, right, that we cannot execute? Because now in the policy there's umpteen more invasive species. So how are we going to, what's the point of bringing this policy? The minister didn't, in his presentation, Madam Chair, didn't give me the comfort to know that the government is able to execute this policy. It just sounds like a nice plan again. And to be able to prove to me that you're able to execute this policy, you have to show inroads now. What are you doing now to execute the current policy? Nothing. Madam Chair, when in the 2021 policy, 2025 policy, I remember good when we were bringing it to Parliament during COVID. At that time, now MP Doran and myself, we were discussing. I told the minister, we have this policy and nobody want to bring it to Parliament and have it done. And it's important, but going forward, the next policy needs to be, it needs to have budget allocation to it. We should at least know what the cost of implementing this policy is. We need to know, at least know, in certain chapters, for example, in the invasive species chapters, what would it, first of all, what is the priority? There's no priority within the policy plan. So which invasive could we have, for example, it had, let's say, two species, earthworms, for example. Yes, they are invasive, but they're here for 50 years already, right? Maybe even 100 years already. So, and earthworms are not, yes, they're invasive, but they're also good for the soil, right? So, is it a critical invasive species? We're missing that in the policy. Is it critical? Is it damaging to the island, right? Or is it the invasive species? Yes, but it actually benefits the the island, even though it came from away, right? It mentions mongoose, for example. As my grandparents said, mongoose were brought in back in the days to eat snakes and some other animals, whatever. So is it, yes, it's invasive, but is it critical now to our nature? No. Is it something that we have to tackle? No. The policy does not state that. So I think the policy, Madam Chair, and it is, I appreciate the work that has been done, but with our fast-moving environment, the rapid construction, the rapid development of St. Maarten, the policy is lacking in a lot of key areas, especially in the areas of direction. If the minister is no longer on this seat, it cannot be something that's just in the cabinet and minister's brain that we want to do this and we choosing to do this. No, the policy lacks direction. Again, invasive species. Which are the most critical invasive species to the island right now that is disturbing our society? Outside of invasive species, for example, we have cats. Cats are not invasive, but right now, I can tell you, by Indigo Bay, the hills in Kobe, we have we have hundreds, maybe thousands of stray cats. And these stray cats are eating a lot of our local birds, right? It's a serious, and we could contact the vets, etc. So it's not invasive, but it is a critical issue, right? Lizard species, birds, etc., etc. The plan does not talk about this, right? So outside of being invasive, we also have other critical factors that are disturbing our nature. Again, I really would like to see financials, even if we get a elucidation document attached to the policy, so you can have this is the policy document, and attached to that document, you have an elucidation document that then puts financials to the policy. Why? Because currently, the Minister of Rummy, the only thing inherent is we don't have any budget. But how can you budget if you don't know what you need to budget? So my next question is going to be, yes, we have this policy now that the Minister has provided to us. The budget 2026, God knows when are going to come, but the current schedule that was sent to us by the Minister of Finance, approval looks like June, July. I would like the Minister to specifically let the Parliament know what aspects of this policy is currently in budget 2026, what line items, where can we find it, and how much. And then I'm going to know, then I would know as an MP then that the Minister is serious about this policy. Because if you're saying you want Parliament to approve this and the Minister says there's no allocation for budget in 2026, then I can't believe the Minister is serious about this policy. Madam Chair, I saw a recent article, and the Minister of Rummy also mentioned myself, my person, in terms of the purchase of Belvedere South. And I want to be very clear on how this came about. We were, as a government in the previous administration, we were dealing with lack of burial locations, and I think that's still the case right now on St. Maarten. We had a meeting of Rummy, VSR, and we mentioned the concern that in a couple of years, we're going to go down to zero, basically. I then stated that I told both departments, listen, what we need is a policy, not just land, we need a policy attached to whatever land we are going to purchase. We didn't have an idea of where we're getting the land from as yet. We have to have a policy attached to the purchase because debt is not finite, right? We are going to continue to die. Belvedere became an option. We went through the process. We decided that with the owners of Belvedere, an area where we're going to put the burying ground, and that it would come with a policy also attached. I see the article from the minister mentioning, yes, that the purchase has been finalized. Also mentioned burying. We also decided in our discussion, you could check the council minister's notes for that minister, that we would have at least 1 or 2 parks within Belvedere South, similar to how we have the park in New York, etc., Central Park, etc. I don't see that in this plan. If you look at the 2021-2025 policy, you see Muller Pond inside here, you see, I believe, Emilia Wilson inside here, and I believe you see another location. the government recently purchased a huge amount of land. Why is it not reflected in the policy? What is the plan with this? Is a 2025-2030 policy. I would expect, with all the publicity of the land purchase, that should be reflected in the policy, right? The vision again. So again, Madam Chair, the policy, and another thing is we don't have the governing program either, so we can't even match the policy with the actual governing program. I mean, we haven't had the presentation of the government on the actual governing program on it, so we have the governing program, but when you have MPs, members of the coalition mentioning, hey, I don't agree with this, I don't agree with that, the meeting that we asked for last year, March, would be very important now. The purchase of the Belvedere South, is it already marked as government-owned or is it still private? Again, I mentioned it should be part of the policy like it was on previously. In addition to that, when Belvedere, the original Belvedere was purchased years ago by the then Island Council members, before the purchase could have been finalized, and you could check the LBAs on this, and it had to be the purchase had to be approved by Parliament. Is this the case? And no. And if not, why not? So Parliament, we could go back and check, Parliament had to approve the purchase back then, right? What's the difference between that purchase of Belvedere and this purchase of Belvedere? The minister mentioned in his article of the purchase of Belvedere that we got an additional almost 200 plus square meters of Belvedere for free, right? So what did the government actually purchase? So is it two different decrees? Because I know what's budgeted for in the CapEx, and I know what's not budgeted for. So when the minister says, and the minister of ECYS says, we got an additional amount of land, we negotiated that amount. So I would like, from the Chief Madam Chair, I'd like to ask the minister for the appraisal report of both properties. I'd like to ask for the appraisal report of both properties. And if the minister is saying that the negotiated part was given for free, then there should be a separate decree just for that amount. If not, that means the government then paid for the full amount, which would mean that the square meter price, the dollar amount per square meter should be a lot less than what initially was budgeted for. So what is the square meter price for that lot that was recently purchased? There's also an area in the corner of the lot that was given out years ago. Is that part of the purchase or not? And I would like the minister to clarify and carefully. The minister mentioned that this current government negotiated the extra amount of land. Now I want to ask, when Belvedere was first purchased years ago, wasn't it already stated and given, the extra part that was so-called negotiated, wasn't that already part of the then agreement? That area would then be used for historical, et cetera, historical reasons, et cetera. Or was that only in 2024, 2025 negotiated? And I want very clear answers on that. And if you must, even go back and check the cadastral documents. So, again, Belvedere, I really would like to know if the government had its own appraisal reports done. Because typically, the government does not depend on appraisal reports of the sellers, because we have to justify what the valuation. So did the government pay for their own appraisal report? Again, if not, that would mean, again, there's a government operating with favoritism, because then other smaller entities, right, we have to know, they are not subjected to their appraisal report, but then also government's appraisal report. And I could take, because we've done it, all right? in the Ministry of Rami, it is mentioned, we've had discussions in the past already about land acquisition, especially in areas where roads are too small, we want to put on sidewalks, etc. I don't see any of this reflected in this nature policy. Even purchasing of land for nature zones. What I gather from this policy and from the minister's presentation and also interviews is that we're going to zone. There's certain areas we're going to zone, but a majority, we're not Aruba or Curacao, where a lot of land is already long lease land that's in government hands. Most of our land is actually reversed, it's in private hands. So if you're going to zone anything, more than likely you're going to be zoning private land. And I'll say this, I do believe that there are certain areas that need to be zoned, right? I do believe that, let's say, for example, on Kobe Hill, come around the hill, parts of the top of the hill should remain. At the end of the day, we are a tourism destination. We need to have some greenery. So I do believe that there are certain areas that need to be zoned. But I also 100% believe that landowners should be compensated. So, and if we decide to zone, there will be landowners, private owners that will be going to court. So where in this policy is there any sort of land acquisition fund? Because one, in the Ministry of Rami, already the policy is, right, or the discussions have been that we need to acquire more land. We need to buy private land. So is that a future plan of the policy? Is that going to be an amendment of the policy? Is that even a plan of the government? Will there be a sort of a land acquisition fund set up again, and would that be reflected in the budget? The Belvedere purchase was on CapEx. But, and the minister mentioned, I believe, in some interview in terms of having a park in Belvedere, but that would require now, not CapEx, but OPEX, operational expense. Is there any budget in 2026 for that? Matter of fact, is there any, because we also have to plan for the next, the future budgets, is the minister preparing the budgets going forward to have the nature aspects of managing the land that we recently bought, maintaining it in the budget? And lastly, the marketing of the policy and how we plan to execute and prepare the population for the policy. I think we've discussed in the past, but then it doesn't happen. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, MP Irian. The next MP to speak is MP Lewis. MP Lewis, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, Minister. My question is very brief. I've listened to the proposed policy, and I haven't seen anything with regards to revenue generating. In governing, I think it's important that we come with some incentives on how we're going to make money. I would also like to focus, if we look at our neighboring partners, if you want to go to St. Thomas and you go through Tortola, for example, there's an environmental tax. Okay, once you're transiting, you're using them as a hub, you have to pay $20 environmental tax. When you come in, you go to St. Thomas, you come back, you pay another $20 tax, basically for transiting within their country, their island. Is or are we looking into, with regards to revenue generating, in such of a tax, and this tax does not burden the people of this country? It will be liable to those that are transiting, using Sint Maarten as a hub to go, for example, to St. Bart's, to go to Anguilla, to go to St. Kitts, to Nevis, to Sabre, to Statia. The tourists that are passing through here can also, those are the ones that will be contributing to this tax. And at the end of the day, if we check our statistics with all the passengers that pass through on our airport, Sint Maarten can make a lot of money by that initiative if taken up in this policy or another policy with regards to the environment. That will be all, Madam Chair.
Thank you, MP Lewis. The next MP up to speak is MP York. MP York, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, just to add to the questions I already posed, in November 2024, I submitted a motion that was supported by Parliament and the Minister at the time, being about zoning and protection of the beaches, etc. In the ensuing meeting, committee meeting, I believe in January or February the following year, 2025, the Minister presented a presentation where he spoke on green zoning in the 2025-2026, where he outlined the plan that was to begin in January 2025 and will go straight through this year, being 2026, as it pertains to zoning. And in green zoning, and we're here talking about nature, I think it goes hand in hand. I remember in the recent, not the most recent, but the budget debate before the most recent one, seeing that we already had a couple last year, I posed a question to the minister at the time asking how far the minister was with the stipulated timeline. At the time, some 8 points were already to be handled. I think the update at that time was that 0 of the 8 were done. If I look at the timeline right now, it was separated in internal preparations, public consultations, and legal process. Today, mid-January, we're supposed to be halfway through the legal process, some 23 steps, according to the minister's timeline. And seeing that we're here speaking about the nature plan and nature policy, I'm curious to know how far the minister is currently with the green zoning plan, because I believe both of them go a bit hand in hand. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, MP York. The next MP up to speak is MP Otley. MP Otley, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I'll be very brief. Over and under, I keep saying that Omar E.C. Otley, when I speak, I don't come in here to play games or a propaganda or play politics. And I thank my colleague, MP Darrell York, for doing what basically I would have done, is outlining everything factually. And those are some serious pending meetings. I have no time to come in here and try to make stuff up, Madam Chair. So I thank you for that, my colleague. As it pertains to the policy, I'll reserve any questions I have for depending on the answers that is given to my colleagues. I just want to say one thing to the minister, though. I noticed a trend when, especially earlier in your career as Minister of Romi, once something hit Facebook or receives a little pressure, then there's a halt. We have to understand if we want progress or not. The Nature Foundation, like any other body, should be seen as just an advisory body. They are not the government. They are not the Minister of Romi. When we sit here for budget debate and we say that most of the money allocated in this country for 2024 was through building permits and through construction, we have to decide what we want to do and realize, Minister, through you, Madam Chair, that you are in charge. Take the advice, but don't buckle to Facebook and pressures. That's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you, MP Otley. The next MP to speak is MP Lacruz. MP Lacruz, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair Lady. Madam Chair Lady, through you to the Minister, in anticipation of this meeting, I had already sent some questions to the Minister concerning the policy that we received back in November. Hearing now the comments and the questions from the other members, they align very much, with a lot of the questions that I had. So I'm not going to go ahead and read all those questions again. The Minister has those questions. So what I would like is when the Minister comes back, if he could integrate them in his whole presentation. And once that is received, then it is okay for me. I do want to thank everyone that had any part of the upgrade on this policy, as it is one that is definitely needed. Just implementation is one of my most greatest concerns. Thank you, Madam Chair Lady.
Thank you, MP Lacruz. Minister, you have heard the questions from members of Parliament. Before I give you the floor in terms of the responses to be provided by you to the questions of the members of Parliament, a few quick additions to the questions already posed, and I look forward to the answers to these questions. But the additions are, Minister, the following. An economic impact assessment. The last time we spoke about this, it was indicated and could have been maybe even by your predecessor that economic impact assessment is required based on the assessment by the ministry of whether such is necessary. In other words, there is no framework yet requiring specific economic impact assessments for certain projects. This is my question. Is there no specific requirements when it comes to the need for such by developers and developments, is my question. Like one of my colleagues, I too would like to get an indication as to the status of the overall zoning of the country. In a discussion again previously on this matter by several members of Parliament, including myself, we were told that the ministry had moved away from district zoning plans to a more comprehensive overall zoning plan, and I would like to get an overview of an indication of where things are at in that regard. Thirdly, and attached to that is my question regarding any zoning intentions, zoning proposals for the area of Mullet Bay, Kupakoi, which I've asked in the past. Of course, we have heard from the Minister of Finance with respect to what those managing Mullet Bay themselves think about the need for a master plan for that property. However, I'm looking at it from a broader governmental perspective. And then, Minister, one of my colleagues referred to the issue of the implementation of this policy plan. And that was a question I had before I received your presentation. And in your presentation now, I am seeing something that is called the nature plan, with an annex being an implementation plan. Is that the entire implementation plan for the nature plan based on the nature policy plan, which we are debating today, is my question. And I ask this also specifically noting that according to law, by the 1st of September, Parliament has to receive a report on the implementation of this plan. So is this the entire nature plan here before us in this presentation, or is that just a sheet that the nature plan will follow from? And because I see some budget amounts mentioned, I also see some challenges, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But where is the implementation plan and the nature plan itself? Because from your presentation, it is obvious that based on this policy, a nature plan, which would include the implementation, is to follow. And if I'm reading that incorrectly, then I would like that to be elucidated by yourself as well. Minister, these are all I wanted to add to the questions already posed. I look at you, Minister. Would you require a minute or two in terms of then reporting back about the responding to these questions? So we're going to adjourn for 3 minutes. Meeting adjourned. Good afternoon, members of Parliament, ladies and gentlemen, Minister of Romy and support staff. I hereby reopen this meeting. We adjourned briefly following the questions by members of Parliament and on the proposed nature policy plan, and the Minister will now give an indication, Minister, as to when the responses to these questions can be expected. Minister Gums, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On the topic of when we can come back after caucusing with the team, we'd like to propose February 9th as the date we can come back to answer the questions of the members of Parliament.
Thank you, Minister. Your proposal for returning to Parliament will be further synchronized between our Secretariat and your office, but we hear when you are able to provide the answers to the questions posed by members of Parliament on this proposal. So with that, I see the Minister is asking to add something briefly before I continue. Minister, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you again, Madam Chair, for your indulgence. And I could not leave here today without making this statement. MP York mentioned 3 pending meetings. I'd like to ask the Secretariat to please indicate if those meeting requests have been communicated to the Ministry of Romy.
That request by you is heard, is heard, Minister Gums, and I know that our Secretary General, our Griffier, is currently busy with a complete overview of the meeting request. We have communicated to several members of Parliament because we have had some overlapping. We have had meetings pending because other meetings have been requested, et cetera, but overall speaking, I think I need to know this as well, meeting requests are looked at in a chronological order. So indeed, we have more recent ones that have been requested for the Minister of Romy, and so we're looking at that comprehensively, but your request will be responded to based on our administration here and meeting requests that we have received, and not all, from what I've understood, are necessarily meeting requests, but also questions that have been asked to the Minister, but you will get a response to this. So, Minister, thank you once again. Members of Parliament, thank you. And I hereby adjourn this Central Committee meeting of Parliament handling the proposed nature policy plan, and of course, the communication regarding the continuation will be forwarded soonest. Meeting adjourned.